My name is Terry David Mulligan, and this is the Mulligan's Through the podcast. And I have, as promised, found Andrea Warner, author extraordinaire, who's just sitting on the biggest bubble in the world right now. She has released and is telling the world about Buffy Sainte-Marie, the Authorized Biography. Surprisingly, the first authorized biography of this amazing woman and her life. Andrea, what kind of a journey was this for you?
Oh man, I am still kind of pinching myself and feeling like, how is this even my life? Because Buffy Sainte-Marie is just the most amazing person, really, in the world. And ever since, before the book came out and even since the book came out, people have been so kind about the writing and so interested, obviously, in Buffy's story and just really so supportive. It's been amazing. And Buffy loves the book, and that means the world to me. And we're going to go on tour a little bit for a week together next week. So I'm really excited.
Here's the thing about doing a book like this, Andrea, having done one, having been the Buffy person on the other side of the microphone, how you get along with the person doing the autobiography, how they see you, how you reveal yourself to them. How did that go? Was it easy? Did it take a while to sort of ramp up? I mean, I know you'd met her before, but tell me about those first couple of months.
Well, I had interviewed her once in 2015. That was our very first interview. And we just had a really amazing connection kind of instantly. And, I do these kinds of interviews over the phone. I have about 20 minutes to create a connection with someone. You are very familiar with this as well. And at the end of the call, I just didn't want to get off the phone with her. And then she said the same thing to me. And so I was like, oh my God, we're friends, in that sort of intimate, close way that you feel after a really good 20 to 30 minute discussion. And then, I continued to write a lot about Power in the Blood, and we were Twitter, friends, sort of. And then when I pitched this book, ultimately, just to ask if there was any interest, they got back to me, and there was. And so but we hadn't really met in person before. So we met in Richmond. She happened to be coming for a conference just in, 15-minute drive from my house. And so I went and met her in Richmond, and we spoke for 2 hours. We just got along really beautifully right away. The very first thing she said to me, and this always sounds like bragging no matter what, so I'm just going to say it, was, "I'm such a big fan of your writing." And I was like, no, I'm a big fan of you. This is not how this works, And it turned out she really had read my first book so thoroughly, so carefully, and she really wanted to spend most of our first 2 hours talking about it. And I had to keep sort of pushing the conversation back to being like, no, Buffy, we're here for you. We're and that really is the foundation of how we did all of our phone interviews for the first 6 weeks. We talked twice a week for 2 hours at a time. It was sort of like being in high school and talking with your friend and getting, building a friendship over the phone. And then I got to go on tour with her after the first 6 weeks for a couple of days. And that was really amazing as well. And we just have continued to have that kind of connection since then. And I think it really has, people always ask me oh, how do you stay objective? How do you sort of keep, that distance that you're supposed to keep as a journalist between yourself and your subject? And I think that's a different kind of writing than writing someone's biography.
Oh, yeah.
I'm fine entering this as a fan, and I think it's actually really important for me to enter this as a fan, and as someone, not just a fan, but someone who really wants to critically examine her music through this my lens as a feminist lens, and also wants to spend a lot of time sort of just making space for her voice and for her really to tell her own story, as opposed to me sort of inserting I'm a white settler, who lives on unceded territory in Vancouver and was born there. I don't need to tell Indigenous people's stories. What I can do is just make some more space to sort of just help those stories kind of unfold through their own mouths, their own words, their own hearts.
I do. Because of her beginnings, being adopted from the Capel Valley, being removed from her family, the people that she knew, and growing up in Massachusetts. It literally could have destroyed her at an early age. It could have made her bitter and cold and antisocial, and it was none of those things. The fact that she survived that beginning in her life basically tells us why she is the person that she is, how strong that she is, how totally self-sufficient that she is. It all started with those early days, didn't it?
Yeah, and I think, the book does talk a lot about this, and it can be very heavy subject matter. She comes from trauma. She comes through trauma. A lot of, in addition to those circumstances of, what we would now refer to as sort of being part of the 60s scoop, also coming from abusive background in her childhood. And she always, in part of her sort of coping mechanism was that she really had such a strong relationship with her mother, Winnie, and she loved her so much, and they were so close. And she also was able to always cultivate this sense of creation from a very early age. From the time she was 3, she was teaching herself piano, she was composing, she was writing music, she was writing songs. She ended up teaching herself guitar. She always felt very at home in nature and with animals. And she talks a lot about that in the book, of just having always had this really strong sense of creation within her, and that being a place where she could, cultivate that safety, cultivate that strength, feel like she had, she had resources within her to be able to survive.
Actually, there's something else that I want to add to that, and that is that I think music saved her life. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think she actually would agree too. I think she would say like sort of art and creation saved her life, but I think music is just such a huge part of that, and music is really that primary space that she sort of found as a place to express herself right away. And I also think it's like super interesting to me as she got older and as she started writing songs, and she thought of herself not explicitly just as an artist or an artiste or something, but she approached her songwriting. She said she was a journalist telling the news. Right. And I love that notion of bringing research and facts and truth in your songwriting. And I think that's one of the big reasons that these songs, musically, they're so interesting and they come together so beautifully. But also one of the reasons they're so relevant to this day is because she's been telling us sort of these like big, huge life truths from the beginning. And I think that has been a big source of part of that survival and that thriving and making something positive out of all of the crap, as it were.
And as she did this, Andrea, Buffy was musically dyslexic.
Yeah, so she can put music out there into the world, but she can't read it back the next day. So she calls it, I think it's musical dyscalculia, and she learned that term from a professor, I believe, at then I can see the name coming in my head right now. But anyway, one of the Berklee College of Music, professor there. And when she learned that term, she was like, oh, that explains what I have. And so she's always really, she's said before, she has some hang-ups sometimes, that she doesn't have all of the theory background that some other musicians have. But she's a natural musician, and she's really grateful for that, because it feels like it is a deeper connection for her, because it really comes from within.
Now you and I are on common ground here, Andrea, because I know that you're very comfortable with music. You write about it. You review albums, and now we can get into her music. The thing about her, as you write about, and it's really important, and you dwell on it quite a bit, and that is that she was sharing stages with Dylan and Joni Mitchell, not so much Neil Young, but at the same sort of time in Yorkville, of course. Joni and Neil headed for Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. She didn't. She chose a completely different path,
Yeah.
which is why there's many people only know her name and don't know her music or don't know her story. It's really important that this gets out there.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely part of it that she chose something different. I mean, I do think sort of it's multiple reasons as to why she's not as you know, like everyone can name a Joni Mitchell song, everyone can name a Neil Young song. Not everyone can name a Buffy Sainte-Marie song. I've had numerous people say to me, "Oh, who's Buffy Sainte-Marie?" when I tell them that this is this book, which of course is I mean, to me it horrifies me, and I really wanted to sort of like rectify that to a certain extent. But I mean, so one, yes, she opted for a very different life, and she had, she talks a lot about how her motivations were very different than perhaps some of her peers. Like some of her peers wanted to get famous and make a bunch of money and sort of be a part of a scene. She wanted to bring, rights to Indigenous people. She wanted to stand up to war and lead sort of help lead a peace movement and talk about why that's important. She didn't, they didn't call it decolonization at that point, but she's been actively sort of like dismantling colonization and colonial violence from the beginning with her work. And so that's a very different sort of motivation for a lot of her activism early on. I also think, though, like in part, she's just never been afforded the same kind of space in, say, like, Rolling Stone and like these other like large rock and roll publications and these rock publications of record, because she is writing about such complicated, important, sort of difficult things. They also wanted to pigeonhole her, I think, into this folk protest singer narrative. She's a racialized Indigenous woman. She's doing a bunch of things that I think they didn't know what to do with. They didn't want to recognize her genius and her sort of like innovation. Like think about like Illuminations making the first, one of the first electronic pop albums. And people weren't really maybe ready for that, but they also just weren't ready to give her the credit for that, because I think, we're still sort of dismantling some of these, the patriarchy and things like that uphold a lot of these publications and have upheld rock and roll for a very long time.
How well did you know the back catalog all the way back to It's My Way from '64 and those early albums that she still feels uncomfortable about because she felt that the vocals weren't right? But were there surprises, revelations there for you?
Well, I mean, there always are. So I actually, for Exclaim a couple of years ago, did a big, huge discography dive of Buffy's. So I had already sort of started to do some of that work before the book, like, a couple of years before the book. But I had known for a while that ultimately one of my goals, like after I wrote my first book, people were immediately asking me, what do I want to do next? And I had already identified back in 2015 that it would be really cool to write a biography of Buffy Sainte-Marie, ideally an authorized biography, because I wanted to work with her on it. And so I was already doing some of that work in various freelance pieces that I was putting out there. But I do remember listening to Illuminations for the first time because I'd heard about it, and I'd heard that she'd like disinherited it, as it were, from her discography. I'd heard like all these different things, and I listened to it, and I was trying to imagine what it would be like to be alive in 1969 and hear this record. And it's so weird. It's like a gothic opera. It's got these obviously all these electronic elements going on, the quadraphonic style. Like there's so much going on. And I just couldn't get over and I really I found it so delightfully weird and ambitious and innovative. And then I was like, wow, I wasn't even born until 10 years after that record. That's like, and it still sounded vibrant and weird and surprising to me listening to it in 2015 maybe is the first time that I ever heard it. And, I just thought about what kind of staying power that is, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book sort of partly just like in relation to exploring her music with her life and being able to come in and out of that so that we could really spend a lot of time, I think, just rediscovering her music. It's one of the nicest things people have said to me is that when they finish the book, they've just immediately gone to Apple or Spotify or wherever they can find all of her music, or their record stores or their parents' record collections or whatever, and just started listening again. Because I think, people don't know how deep and interesting and varied it is.
I really, I saw the early days, and I saw her live in the early days, but it's when Moonshot came along, and she used to want to be a ballerina with Nietzsche, and then Memphis Horns with Moonshot and Norbert Putnam and all those guys.
Yeah.
That's when I started to go, this has legs. She's going in a different direction here. And then along came Up Where We Belong. Is it her biggest hit ever?
Oh, I definitely think so. I mean, and I do like the song quite a bit, but there are some other songs that I think are just so much more interesting. Like Not the Lovin' Kind I think that is like a lost like rock jam. Like that should have been huge. And I mean, Up Where We Belong is a really beautiful song, and hearing her sing it is so different than hearing Jennifer Warren's and Joe Cocker version, which is beautiful, but it's sort of a intense early 80s kind of ballad. And I love Buffy's treatment of it because it just feels so much more humble. It's a quieter, more reflective version. And that's also one of the reasons I spend a lot of time in the book, I'm sure, as you may have noticed, talking about Until It's Time for You to Go, which I think is actually one of the earliest feminist pop anthems that really never, ever, even though it's been covered a ton and lots of people have done great work with that. It's very popular for a lot of people. It hasn't been popular for Buffy, and I think that she kind of gets erased in that. People think it belongs to somebody else, but it's such an incredible song.
We're talking about Buffy Sainte-Marie. The writer and the voice you hear is Andrea Warner, who's going to be very busy with Buffy for the next little while. I know you're doing the Vancouver Book Festival, and then you're heading for New York.
Yeah, so I'm really lucky that she's taken a week out of her schedule to come on the road with me. We do Vancouver at the Writers Festival, and I'm really proud of that event because it's like one of the first events that sold out at the Writers Festival, and it sold out really early, and so people are really excited about it. Then we go to New York the very next day, and our event there is on October 24th, and it's at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, and I hear it's a really beautiful venue, and I'm just so excited for that support. And then we go to Toronto. And we are at the Toronto International Festival of Authors, and I think that will also be a really great event.
Okay. Very quickly, because I wrote this down. I wrote this at 3:00 in the morning, so I can barely read my writing. running for the Drum, the Juno for Best Aboriginal Album, but it was just great music. Power in the Blood. Won the Polaris Prize, a couple of Junos, Medicine Songs. I mean, if you take them one after the other, it's astonishing that after everything that she's done, including Sesame Street and all of the acting and everything she's done, she reinvents herself. I think you call them comeback albums 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, because I mean, like I know that the industry likes to call them comeback albums, so I get it. But I just really do see it as it's just continuing what she was doing all along. Like she was radically reinventing herself over and over again, actually, from the 1966 album. She was sort of starting to explore like folk and country. Then she did I'm Gonna Be a Country Girl again, 1968. The following year she released the electronic album Illuminations. She's got these like funk and soul kind of like hard rock records that are coming out in the mid 70s, early 70s, I should say. And in 1976, she did her first version of Star Walker with a digitized powwow sample in 1976. So I mean, these they're comebacks to a certain extent, but I really do think like she has just always radically been reinventing her musical sound because she's such a curious person. She's reading all the time. She's exploring all the time. She's a very restless mind, and it really like reflects in her art and what she's interested in. She's really obsessed with sort of technology, and she's so interested in so many different things. And I think that really reflects in this whole sort of sonic palette that she's always explored and spent some time in.
Hey, Andrea, you and I have both talked to artists. Some of whom, when you say you're a role model, they say, "I don't want to be a role model. I just want to be me. I don't want to have don't be like me. I'm having problems just being like me." But she is a flat out great role model. Yes.
Oh, I think so, absolutely. And I think she would go back to like her very first record with "It's My Way," though, and she would caution everyone. When she wrote "It's My Way," it was to say that I am carving my own path. You carve your own path as well. Like, take that inspiration. Don't necessarily try to replicate, what I'm doing because it's working for me. But like, be inspired to carve your own path and go out and do things yourself and figure out a way, to change the world yourself. And yeah, she's a huge inspiration.
What price did she pay for her activism?
Well, she was blacklisted by 2 different presidential administrations, so that's, that's a big one. She really was. She says she was put out of business in America, and she was. Like, she did not. From 1976 to 1991, she didn't put out a record. She didn't know that she was blacklisted. She had, she found out sort of somewhere in the mid 80s. And then she released "Coincidence and Likely Stories" as the first comeback, really, in 1991. And, it cost her a lot because there's a reason why, yes, she's definitely famous in Canada, but she doesn't think of herself as famous in the States really at all. And to a certain extent, I think she's right. Like, I will say when we were on tour, there were really long lines every night to get her to sign records, and the rooms were full. So I think she's famous a little, anyways. But her level of recognition in the U.S. is nowhere near what it is in Canada. And then additionally, not only was she blacklisted, but like shipments of her records would go missing, and so there was a real active effort to suppress and oppress her voice.
Initially, when Sesame Street approached her, she turned them down. She didn't want to do it. She didn't want to be the token native on the show. But then she started to talk to, because she phoned them back and said, and you captured this, that she said, how about a different type of show? And all of a sudden they got together, and when they started the creative, and then she stayed for years. And there's another mentorship where she was Indigenous person on television every day for an entire generation.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of visibility, I think we often take it for granted. Like, and I say we, and I really do mean, I think white people, is we take it for granted that we can see ourselves on television all the time. But this is not the same for Indigenous people. It's not the same for lots of people of color, lots of queer people. Like, there's just so many people. I identify as a fat woman, and there were very few role models for me growing up as well. And so that visibility, that being able to connect with somebody that looks like you on television, on mainstream television, in our pop culture, it's really life affirming, and it can be quite life changing as well.
Well, when you first sat down and read that book with her, I know you did it as a photo opportunity, but it's kind of hairy scary because the person that you've written about, it's very personal to them. How did she take it? How did she like the book form when it was finally in front of her?
Well, she was actually really heavily involved in the editing process. Yeah. She's one of the first people that I sent my first version of it to. Like, I sent her the first draft. I got her feedback. She saw it before the publisher, and she gave me her feedback. And then she's been really heavily involved. She's edited it. She's copy edited it. She's a great editor, by the way. She's like just a real eagle eye on that. Yeah. And she has been heavily involved. And so when she saw like sort of the near last draft is when she was in town for the Junos actually earlier this year, and she stayed an extra day, and we hung out, and we went and I took her to the cat cafe and stuff like that, and she said something really wonderful and really beautiful, and I again, it sounds like humble bragging, which I don't want to do, but I think it's important because she said that reading this book, she felt empowered by her own story, and that meant a tremendous amount to me. Like, I basically burst into tears when she said that. And I could cry now. But anyway, that's really important to me, that because I think her story is so empowering, and it's a really remarkable thing to feel like what you've been through, what matters to you, but to feel like you really are able to look and track how you've moved through life in a way that is just, I don't know, like really soul affirming. I was really grateful that she felt that way, and that she still feels that way when she saw the book. And she's so funny. We lifted up the cover because she liked the cover and stuff, and then we lifted up the cover and saw the pink hardcover underneath, and she called it Vulva Pink, and we laughed and laughed and laughed because we're funny like that. And she's so funny, and that's another thing people don't really realize.
I'm glad you said that, because she is absolutely, she has a wicked sense of humor.
Oh my God, such a wicked sense of humor.
Shocking things come out of her mouth. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I love it.
And that's why you two on stage together are going to be quite a pair. Whose idea was it to ask Joni Mitchell to write the foreword?
Well, actually, so I thought it was my idea, but it turns out it was not. So I actually reached out to Joni's people to see if she would be interviewed for the book, because I knew that Buffy had carried her tape and, had been they'd been kind of important to each other. And then her person got back and said she's not doing any press right now for a couple months, but she's interested. Get back to us. But by the time I had written the book, and I was like, okay, well, it's probably not happening. Turns out that my editor, Jen Kroll at Greystone, had emailed Joni's people and asked them if she would be willing to write the foreword. And they said yes. And Joni said yes. And so that was a real surprise to me. I did not actually know that was happening. Wow. And yeah. Okay.
Now the book's done.
It is.
And you hit the road together, you two.
Yes.
Will you do a verbal interview with it? Was somebody going to read the book? Are you going to have in what form is it going to show up?
Well, I'm going to read a little bit, like at each of our events mostly, so two of our events, it's just her and I in conversation with each other. So mostly it'll just be us being ridiculous probably for about 45 minutes. And I will do a short reading to kick off each of those events. And then at the third event, we have an interviewer who will be asking us both questions. Okay. And so I'm pretty excited about that. There's going to be an audio book. It will be out in a couple of weeks, actually. And I had the real pleasure of recording the audiobook myself. And Buffy recorded. In the book, there are these interludes where it's just her speaking in her voice for sure. A couple of paragraphs. And so she recorded those interludes as well. So I'm really excited that the audiobook features both of us.
My life flashed in front of my eyes as I read some of these chapters, and I thank you for capturing that. I really did, because I had forgotten about those days. They blurred because you use up a little space in your brain, and then I went back and it all cleared for me, and I can remember very distinctly a young Buffy Sainte-Marie and being smitten by her. I think we're all smitten, and I'm glad that you're telling this story to another generation.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. I really appreciate it.
There was so much to talk about, Andrea. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
On to the next book when you get a chance. Thank you.
Thank you.
The book is called Buffy Sainte-Marie, the Authorized Biography, and she has been Andrea Warner.